I have yet to see a Miirym Sentinel Worm deck in the 15 budget range. Pretty sure I built a Dragonless Miirym deck already. Too bad he won't build a Miirym Commander deck. But I did though. I thought. Okay, so apparently I've got to make a Miirym deck for, at the very least, Jack Hurst and Absol Sama. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing those correctly. Alrighty, so I guess technically the last time I built a Miirym deck, I made it a giant meme where it was all clones, and we didn't actually have any synergies for Miirym specifically outside of cloning Miirym a billion times. The end result of this is that while I enjoyed the deck that was put together with all of those resources, that doesn't necessarily mean that I built the Miirym deck that most people are wanting to see. Usually when they see Miirym, they want to see dragons and lots of other dragons that are not just named Miirym. So today, let's go ahead and get into building that deck specifically. Miirym Sentinel Worm is a teamer and 3/6/6 Dragon Spirit Commander who says whenever another non-token dragon touches the battlefield, you get to make an exact token of it, except it loses legendary status. Now, this creature is bonkers. I would go on to say that Miirym is the strongest of all of the dragon commanders. And I know there's going to be like 3 Ur-Dragon stands or 5 people who love Scion of the Ur-Dragon, and yes, those are very powerful, but I'm of the opinion that Miirym is in a league above both of them. My reasoning being, 1 dragon usually clinches a game for you, 2 dragons usually does infinitely more than that, and if you can get any more than that amount of dragons, you're basically coasting on easy street. Miirym gives you the ability to spawn more dragons than your opponents can handle, and also has Ward, which means that anybody trying to get rid of Miirym is having to basically spend their entire turn doing so. Now, Ward 2 may not seem like a lot, but in practice, when people are running cards like Infernal Grasp and Murderous Rider, those types of removal struggle to deal with Miirym, because if you've ramped into Miirym on turn 5, they're having to spend every ounce of mana they have on that turn getting rid of your commander instead of advancing their board state. And sometimes that's a bit of a Faustian bargain for them when you're in green and you can just rebuild pretty quickly. Now, when I first made my channel, one of the challenges that I had was building a dragon deck for a $15 budget. This seemed basically impossible because of how expensive dragons can be. Now that I've been doing this for about a year now, this is, well, not hard at all. And as more and more dragons are released in future sets, their prices tend to go down. It's a really wonderful thing. So let's go ahead and talk about what our strategy is going to be. We're going to be summoning a lot of big dragons, and that is not how that's supposed to look. That is how that's supposed to look. There we go. That's a awkward peek behind the curtain into how editing works for this channel. Anyway, our goal with these big dragons is to get benefits from cloning them. Anything that we would like to see whenever we spawn a couple of them on the board. So let's go ahead and look at the first one. This is Savage Ventmaw. Anytime it attacks, we add 3 of each red and green mana, and we do not lose that mana as steps and phases end, meaning until the end of the turn, we just get to hold on to that mana. If we have 2 Savage Ventmaws because of our commander, this means we will effectively have 12 mana we can spend on anything, and since most dragons tend to cost about 6, this is 2 free dragons we get to drop onto the board. And since Miirym clones those dragons, that means 4 dragons get to drop onto the board. This is a card that has to be dealt with very quickly once it sees the battlefield, especially when you start putting down cheap dragons like Territorial Hellkite. This thing has flying, haste, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, choose an opponent at random that it didn't attack last combat, and this cannot attack that player. Basically, Territorial Hellkite gets to randomly select who it's not able to bonk. And, well, if there isn't an opponent to choose, then you tap it. So once you've got one opponent left, then the Territorial Hellkite only gets to attack every other turn, like some kind of slack-off Pokemon or something. But at 4 mana for a 6/5, the rate of return on here is fantastic. Then we have Scourge of the Throne. This has Dethrone, so it can get extra counters, but the biggest thing is that it can give you extra combats by punching the player with the most life. Red Dragon is my favorite dragon in Magic the Gathering in Red's colors of everything. I love this thing. It enters the battlefield and it deals 4 damage to every opponent. But if you're gonna play this little 16-cent dragon, I highly suggest you fork over the extra 30 cents to get this red dragon. Look at the artwork on that. That thing is fantastic. I adore this thing, especially because most of my games when I play Miirym are closed out by this dragon. It enters the battlefield, it deals 4 damage to every opponent, but if Miirym's cloning it, it's dealing 8 damage to every opponent. But there are plenty of ways to make that effect do infinitely more damage than what it is seeming. Then back on cheap dragons, we have Skyship Stalker. This is effectively a Shivan dragon that can also give itself haste by using one of its various red mana costed abilities. Pay 1 red mana for fire breathing, pay 1 red mana for first strike, pay 1 red mana for haste. Basically, pick and choose what you need most from the Skyship Stalker. Capricious Hellraiser is a dragon from Phyrexia that costs 3 less if we have 9 or more cards in our graveyard. And when it enters the battlefield, exile 3 cards at random from our graveyard, choose a non-creature, non-land from them, and copy that spell and cast that copy without paying its mana cost. If we drop 2 of these out onto the board, then we get double the chances at getting our free spells with this, and it is a 4/4 dragon, even if it doesn't get us any good spells. Warmonger Hellkite has fire breathing for your entire board, and all creatures are effectively goaded, but they can still attack you. But you are playing a dragon deck, so if they do swing things at you, the likelihood that they're going to make it through is really, really low. Then we have the big boy, Thrakkus the Butcher. When this thing attacks, double the power of every dragon we control until the end of the turn. If we have 2 Thrakkuses out, because our commander will make a non-legendary copy of it, this will quadruple the power of all of those dragons. This means that if our commander is out and we play Thrakkus the Butcher, and we can give our dragons haste in any manner, then our commander can deal 24 damage to a single player, instantly ending the game for whoever is the biggest threat in the game state. Otherwise, it just makes our big go-wide boards that much bigger and go-widier. Then we have 2 cards, Stirring Bard and Avenging Hunter. Both of these effectively are just dragons that give us the initiative, and the initiative allows us to have access to this bad boy. The Undercity is what we end up going into when we go into the initiative. We effectively get a free land out of our deck into our hand as soon as we get the initiative, and if a Miirym's out, we clone the initiative card, meaning we will get access to scrying 2 cards right afterwards, or putting 2/1 counters on a creature. Basically, with the initiative, you pick and choose your adventure which way down the dungeon you want to go. So if you choose the Forge, you go into Trap, and then Archives, and then Throne of the Dead 3, or you can choose Lost Well into Arena, into Archives, into Throne of the Dead 3. Basically, no matter how you go through the initiative, you want to hit Archives so that you can get a free draw out of it before getting your free creature out of Throne of the Dead 3. If you need your Scry 2 to set up a good hand, then grab that. Otherwise, the 2/1 counters is fine, but you usually don't need that when you are playing a commander as big as Miirym, with a deck with creatures as big as Miirym's are. And for the same reason, the 5 life from Trap is likely not going to give you too much benefit. The treasure token from Stash seems like a good idea, but in practice, that 1 treasure token doesn't really get you as far ahead as getting another dragon out of your deck with Archives, especially because our deck is going to be running a very hefty ramp package. It should be noted as well that we don't just go into the dungeon every single time we activate an ability that puts us there. The initiative works a lot like Monarch, where as long as we have it, we are able to just keep it until we get hit, generating more and more value from the initiative. This will allow you to dig through there as long as you are able to maintain a position of board dominance, or you're able to just get a flyer in on your opponent whenever they take the initiative from you. Also, the initiative just speeds up games, so I really like it. Let's also look at the next mechanic that Miirym needs to take advantage of, and that is cloning. So if you have Miirym on the board, if you play a clone onto Miirym, Miirym will create a copy of the clone and then kill the original clone with the legendary rule, meaning you'll still have 2 Miiryms. This will allow you to get extra value out of every dragon you are ETBing, and clones tend to cost less than usual dragons, so these are a wonderful way to spend your mana. The extra text on each of these doesn't matter too terribly much, but we are running Undercover Operative, Operative, Vizier of Many Faces, Visage, Bandit, and Copycrook. All of them cost 4, all of them clone, and all of them have little extra superfluous effects that we can take advantage of if we so desire. But the biggest thing is these are cloning Miirym, and that is what matters more than anything else. With that said, let's go ahead and get into the draw package of the deck so that we can dig through our deck and get to our clones and our big dragons. We're going to be running a 10-card draw engine to dig through our deck as best as we can, and we're going to begin with Eureka Moment. This lets us draw 2 cards and then immediately play a land onto the battlefield, giving us both draw and ramp since we are playing a deck with some of the biggest and most expensive creatures of all time. Urban Evolution draws 3 cards and lets us play an additional land as well. Then we have Memory Deluge to look at the top 4 cards and then put 2 into our hand. We can also cast it from the graveyard late into the game if we need to, and I am surprised that this thing is 17 cents. Afterwards, we have Nullspine Dragon to allow us to wheel our hand away after we've dealt a lot of damage to our opponents, and Skyline Despot, which gives us access to the Monarch mechanic, which also generates us red dragons if we can maintain holding on to the Monarch. Then, to benefit us from having big creatures, we have Garruk's Pack Leader and Garruk's Uprising, which will both draw us cards when we play our big creatures. And then to make use of the flying most of our dragons have, let's add Reconnaissance Mission, Bident of Thassa, and Coastal Piracy, as each of these will draw us a card whenever our dragons make face with one of our opponents. And that does it for all the draw. Ideally, this should let you dig through most of your deck. We do have to dedicate the majority of our deck to ramping through because all of our cards do cost an obscene amount. So let's go ahead and quickly get into not ramp. We're talking about removal next. I've said it before and I'll say it again, players do not run enough removal in the game of Magic the Gathering. There is a responsible amount of removal you should be playing. When you are playing a blue deck, please run some counter spells. When you're playing a black deck, don't forget ways to get rid of enchantments. When you're playing a red deck, don't forget things like the Liquid Metal Torque, which can allow you to blow up anything that is a artifact, since you can turn things into artifacts with the Torque, and it's just a mana rock that you get to play basically for free. Anyway, that little bit of advice out of the way, let's talk about our removal. We are going to go with the basics here of an Abrade to get rid of artifacts and creatures, Refute to counter spells, Negate to counter non-creature spells, and Airtie's Scorn to counter spells, and it will cost less if we have multiple spells on the stack as well. Return to Nature can blow up any artifact, enchantment, or a card in a graveyard. Sapphire Dragon's Adventure Side can counter any non-creature spell while also being a dragon later in the game. Resculpt can be used to get rid of artifacts or creatures, and then we have Decisive Denial, which allows us to make one of our dragons fight, or it can be a mana leak for any non-creature spell. After that, all of our removal is going to be dragon-based. Lawzan Dragon's Legacy can aim our dragon's power at any non-commander on the board. We can also hit our opponent's faces with it. Opportunistic Dragon can yank humans and artifacts from our opponents. Tyrant of Kerr Ridge is a Shivan Dragon with a deal 4 damage clause on top of it. Mordant Dragon has a fire-breathing ability while also being able to deal damage to any opponent's creature as long as we have bopped somebody in the face with its face. Then we have Bogarden Hellkite, which says if it enters the battlefield, divide 5 damage to any number of creatures or players. Oftentimes, this is great when you clone it because you have 10 damage you can spread around as if you just freely casted a bunch of Furies in Modern. Oh wait! Fury's banned from Modern. Anyway, next one is Foe Razor Regent. Enters the battlefield, fights any creature you control, and then whenever a creature we control fights, we can put 2/1/1 counters on it at the beginning of the next end step. Now, the cool thing about Foe Razor Regent in this deck is if we play Foe Razor Regent, our commander is going to create 2 Foe Razor Regents, and both of those Foe Razor Regents will hit the battlefield and fight things at the same time. When those Foe Razor, well, not at the same time, but they will both fight things. This means that one of your Foe Razor Regents will see 2 instances of fights basically happen, or 2 instances of the Foe Razor Regent trigger happening, meaning your first Foe Razor Regent comes down and it will have 6 power at the end of the turn if it survives the fight, but your second Foe Razor Regent will come down as an 8/9 at the end of the turn because 2 Foe Razor Regents will have seen it fight any one creature. This This is a fantastic way to get a very powerful board state while also getting rid of your opponent's board states at the same time. Nobody really wants to deal with an 8-9 dragon beating their schnoggin in every turn after you've managed to get rid of their commander. We're also going to run the board wipes of Chain Reaction because it costs so little in the monetary side, Thunder Dragon to get rid of every creature that doesn't have flying, and Consuming Tide because we can get rid of everything that is not our commander, and because we have so much ramp in this deck we'll get into in a second, we are able to build our board state very, very quickly, more so than our commanders. More so than our opponents. All we need is our commander out on the board, and then we can just clone dragons to build a better board state. As long as we can keep our commander out, we are golden. So this is a fantastic removal spell for our deck. And that does it for all the removal. That should be enough to make sure our opponents do not win the game off of the backs of, well, basically doing nothing. But with that said, we do still need to talk about other things that we need to do. Namely, our cards are expensive, so we gotta ramp into those cards. Let's talk about that real quick. I mentioned our mana curve being as high as it is, and yeah, if most of the cards in our deck cost at least 4 mana or more, that means we have a terribly high mana curve. And if you look at our curve, while we do have a standard mid-range curve curving out at 4, we do have plenty of cards in the 5, 6, and 7 range. This means we desperately need to be able to get to high amounts of mana as fast as possible, down to the fact that we are going to be literally sacrificing turns to try to get to adequate amounts of mana, and that's okay. That is just the sacrifice you have to make when playing a dragon deck. To that end, we are going to be running 18 ramp spells, and I know that is a lot, but trust me, it is necessary. Let's get into each of them. Lapis Ord of Dragonkind is a mana rock that lets us scribe when we play dragons. Jade Orb gives hexproof to dragons when we cast them with it as well. Rapacious Dragon makes 2 treasures when it touches the board. Stone Speaker Crystal lets us get rid of cards in graveyards while also being a 2-mana mana rock. Scaled Nurturer is a mana dork that also happens to be a dragon, so we can clone it with our commander. Ganix Astral Hunter gives us treasures every time dragons touch the battlefield. Dawn Treader Elk is effectively the same card as Wayfarer's Bauble and Font of Fertility. Those two are right here as well. They all come onto the board early, and then we can sack them to get basic lands out of the deck. Patron of the Art enters the battlefield and gives us a treasure when it comes onto the battlefield or when it dies, and Swashbuckler Extraordinaire gives us a treasure, and we can sack treasures to give our dragons double strike as well. Explorer allows us to draw a card and then drop a land onto the battlefield, and Growth Spiral does much the same. Then we have the Carnelian Orb of Dragonkind, which can give our dragons haste while also being a great mana rock in its own right. Search for Tomorrow can grab any basic land from our deck and drop it onto the battlefield untapped. We can also play it on turn 1 with its suspend ability. Wood Elves grabs us any forest out of our deck, which is great for getting dual lands out when we need them. Wild Growth is one of our best turn 1 plays outside of Search for Tomorrow because we can use it to quickly ramp up to higher amounts of mana. And a Dragon Lord Servant can drop the cost of all of our dragons by 1. And of course, we've got a lot of dragons in this deck, 26 of them to be exact. After that, we've got a bunch of lands to get into. We are running 5 islands, 7 forests, and 6 mountains because we need to hit our early green ramp as fast as possible. After that, we are running Cinderglade and Tangled Islet as they are both forests that can be grabbed with Wood Elves, Frostboil Snarl, Vine Glimmer Snarl, and Game Trail as they all come out untapped and work fantastic for what they're doing. And then we have the filter lands of Ferris Lake, Overflowing Basin, and Mossfire Valley. Technically, we could run more dual lands here, but unfortunately, we are strapped for monetary value right now. Miirym uses a whole $1 of our deck's value, and we are at $16.33, meaning that our main deck is costing us about $15.40. We are just a little above that $15 limit, so just remember, you can run more dual lands in your version of the deck. Then we have the fetching lands of Evolving Wild, Terramorphic Expanse, Bountiful Landscape, Nereid Landscape for ramping, and Ash Barrens for mana fixing early. Then we are running the Omni lands of Exotic Orchard, Command Tower, Secluded Courtyard, Path of Ancestry, and Unclaimed territory. 3 of these really benefit us having lots and lots of dragons, but the last one we have here is Temple of the Dragon Queen, which can be used for any kind of mana you need, as long as you choose it when you play it, and, well, it has one stipulation: have a dragon in your hand, or it comes into play tapped. After this, we're running the utility lands of Mosswort Bridge and Spine Rock Knoll to give us access to freely castable dragons, and a Pit of Offerings to give us even more access to our opponent's graveyards. And that does it for all the mana and ramp in the deck, and that is probably the beefiest portion of the deck since we are running 40 lands and 18 ramp spells. But that all said, none of this means anything if you don't know how to play the deck, so let's very quickly go over that. If I'm being honest, you want to have at least 2 ramp spells in your opening hand, as well as at least 3 lands. And this opening hand happens to have 4 ramp spells and 3 lands, so I would definitely take it. Let's begin by drawing a card and playing a forest, and moving into turn 2, where we draw the Dragon Lord's Servant. Well, last turn we would have had to play the Font of Fertility, but you know what I mean. Then this turn, we're going to play an island, and we're going to tap 2, and we are going to go ahead and crack that Font of Fertility to grab a mountain out of the deck. Land ramp is the safest ramp, so we are going to hold on to that. Moving into turn 3, we have an Overflowing Basin, and we can go ahead and use it to play our Scale Nurturer. Actually, no, we're going to use our Carnelian Orb of Dragonkind, and then we are going to pay 3 to play our Dragon Lord's Servant. Now dragons will cost less, and we will be golden when our next turn comes around. Turn 4 comes up, and we can go ahead and play our Command Tower, pay 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's go ahead and play Miirym, and it's going to have haste this turn, but we want to pay 1 to go ahead and play Scaled Nurturer, and we are going to get a copy of Scaled Nurturer thanks to Miirym. Miirym gets to dome a player on turn 4, which is a fantastic feeling, let me tell you. Next turn comes up, and we have an Avenging Hunter. I think that the correct move... We need to get some lands out of our deck, so let's go ahead and crack this Ash Barrens out, and we'll pay 1, 2, 3, and we're going to go ahead and get that Avenging Hunter out as well. With all... Actually, no, we're going to use these for that. We're not going to use this mana for that, because we'll be able to gain 4 life by doing it this way. Avenging Hunter comes out. We're going to get 2 basic lands out of the deck because of the initiative trigger and also the Ash Barrens ability. We also get to scry 2 with the Undercity now, so let's go ahead and take a look at what our 2 are available at the top. We have a Counter Spell and a Ramp Spell. We have plenty of lands, and we have a Negate in our hand, so we don't actually need either of these. So let's go ahead and bottom both of those, and we'll play a land for turn. We have 2 of these dragons out because of Miirym, and we're going to pay 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're going to play Ganax out on the board. 2 Ganaxes touch the board, and that gives us access to 3 treasure tokens. Now we have the ability to punch our opponents with one of our Avenging Hunters and our Miirym, and on our opponent's turn, let's go ahead and assume that by turn 5 they are going to try to get rid of our board, so we are going to have to negate that ability away. We move into our next turn. We get to goad a creature because of our initiative trigger, and we draw a Bogarden Hellkite. Let's go ahead and pay... Let's go ahead and drop our mountain down and pay 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and we are going to get Bogarden Hellkite out times 2. This is going to give us a pseudo board wipe, getting rid of multiple cards on the board, and then one of our Bogarden Hellkites has haste, so we get to swing out with everything, and we are generating multiple treasures for getting all of these out. We have 5 treasures available now for casting anything, but we are out of cards in our hand, which does suck a little bit, but we are punching an opponent out with a giant board of dragons. We move into the next turn, turn 7, and we get to draw an extra card because of the Undercity, and it's 2 more lands, but we do have the dominant board state, so it's not really the end of the world. We play a Secluded Courtyard, and we hold the last land in our hand. And at this point, most games are going to be over by turn 8. So let's go ahead and draw our last card. Or rather, we do go into the next turn, and the Undercity is going to let us look at the top 10 cards of our deck, and then we get to get one of those cards out on the battlefield effectively for free. And I'm gonna be perfectly honest, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I think the correct one to drop down, man, Undercity doesn't give it haste. I would say it should be the Skyline Despot. Actually, no, I think it is the Skyline Despot anyway, because we still want to be able to get the Monarch to draw more cards. As much as I would like to give it haste, unfortunately, at this particular juncture, we're basically where we need to be. So we'll go ahead and draw our card for our opening turn. It's a Path of Ancestry that we don't really need right now, and we're going to go ahead and swing out with everything. At the end of the turn, we draw an extra card, thanks to Skyline Despot, and the card we drew was an Urban Evolution. So in the world where we didn't close the game out on our opponents, the Urban Evolution is going to let us draw 1, 2, 3 extra cards, and drop an additional land out, and the card it gave us was a Territorial Hellkite, which we would be able to use to deal 12 damage to an opponent very, very easily. All things considered, the deck can be very, very quick. It is very much an aggro deck, and you are fighting mostly in the sky. Just pick the control player and wipe them out as fast as possible so that the other mid-rangey players on the table are having to deal with a board they just do not have the resources to contend with. That said, if you had a little bit of extra money, let's see what you would add into this deck, because I know that I will never get rid of my full power Miirym deck. So let's go ahead and talk about what cards you would be throwing in there. As you're upgrading the deck, one of the things you may want to do is increase the speed at which it is ramping so that your first couple turns that you're basically having to sacrifice to ramp can be a little stronger. Dragon Speaker Shaman can get you there very easily. But a thing you may have noticed in the deck is it runs into two major issues. One, dragons are going to be a huge threat. They need haste to eliminate players quickly. Temur Ascendancy solves this problem while solving the other problem of the deck, which is running out of cards very quickly because we are basically playing an aggro deck. Temur Ascendancy gives all of our creatures haste and lets us draw cards whenever they drop onto the battlefield. Let's also draw some cards faster with Dragonborn Champion, Elemental Bond, Kindred Discovery. Each of these will allow us to draw cards for just playing our deck efficiently. And if we have a board state of any kind, Riskar's Expertise draws us lots of cards and then plays us a dragon for free. Another way to get haste easier in the deck is with a Lightning Greaves. This not only can protect Miirym very well, but it can be thrown around your board to any dragon that you need to give haste during that turn, especially if you have a dragon that's come out with the Carnelian Orb of Dragonkind and its brother cloned with Miirym didn't have access to the haste. Let's also make sure we've got a little more access to ramp in the deck with a Gold Span Dragon. And let's close out games really powerfully with a combination of cards. We can multiply our damage with multiple Twin Flame Tyrants with our commander. Terror of the Peaks gives us access to lots of dragon and to the battlefield effects that blow up our opponent's stuff. Scourge of Valkis is doing very much the same thing, but a little bit cheaper. And then Lathless Dragon Queen. When we have multiple Lathlesses on the board, we can spawn a metric fuck ton of tokens, and I'm going to be perfectly honest, if you are playing a Lathless Dragon Queen in your deck, please do yourself a favor and swap it over to the correct Lathless. This Lathless right here. This is the only Lathless you should be running if you are playing a Lathless. That all said, that's really it for the deck. It's a very fast deck out the box, but it does run into a problem in the budget build, where if you don't have one of the deck's draw engines early, you're kind of screwed out for being able to draw more cards. And most of the cards we would be able to get really, really good access to for draw do break the deck's budget. So I do think the draw engine cards should be the first upgrades you are going for. But the deck, again, will function very well at the $15 level regardless. That all said, I do want to say thank you all for watching this video. Thank you for sticking around here, and thank you for just helping this channel get closer and closer to 10,000 subscribers. I really appreciate it. If you haven't already, please consider following the channel over on Blue Sky, perhaps subscribing to this one if you haven't already. Maybe support me over on Patreon, that would be fantastic. There's a link to that in the description. There's also a link to the channel playmat in the description as well. And if you want to catch me live, then I am live over on youtube.com/@SurisLive and also at twitch.com/NecoSuris. And I'm usually live every Monday through Thursday. Thank you all for watching. I appreciate each and every one of you for being here. And as always, everyone, insert end of video tagline here. Hey, thanks for making it to the end of the video. I really could not do any of this without all of you. Those of you watching, and especially those of you who support me on Patreon. I wanted to go ahead and take a minute to thank all of you who do that, because with YouTube being what it is these days, I really cannot do this full time without the support from each and every one of you. Those people would be Red Joker, Purple Poundini, Jemshin, Britzkrieg, Jupe the Malignant, Michael, Ravalern, Mabbity Babbity, Astral Frontier, Tales of Atonement, Nixie-chan, Kiri Artemis, Victorian Alchemist, I'm not saying the last part of that, and you know that, Arcton Arclacier, Kiratorian, Dren Hadamata, Jordan M, John L, Lord Bleck, Smiling Game Master, and Fireshard. Thank you so very much. But since you're here, why not go ahead and try watching another one? There should be one that's on the screen right now. And if you are a patron of mine, I wanted to go ahead and thank you again for all of your support. There is still a video you could press though, if you'd like. I would appreciate it just a little bit.